What's up, guys? How's it going? So, there's a moment in my recent memory that I've sort of been thinking about lately. It was a weekend when my brother, my dad, and I decided we wanted to go on a camping trip just to get out of the house and have some fun. It was a fun trip with lots of nice moments, but one of the days we went hiking and we had a grand old time. We talked about the world. It was maybe politics, just our families and each other. Eventually, and I don't remember exactly how this became relevant, but at one point, I brought up the singer Owl City, aka Adam Young. That's because I was really into his music at the time, and I listened to his stuff whenever I had free time. My dad knew Owl City and seemed to have a surface-level appreciation for him, mainly based on the same song everyone else knows him by, Fireflies, since me and my siblings blasted it a lot. So my dad and I talked about that song and pondered what it might mean. We talked about how many people probably relate to that same feeling Adam expresses in the song. That was when we came to the conclusion about what its underlying theme seems to be. Imagination. Imagination is a very common and celebrated idea in our world, and the way I interpret imagination is yearning to see a fantasy universe, a place that is different from where we live. Maybe there would be monsters and goblins, abstract art out the wazoo, music synced to every action the player makes, or about infinity other things. Everyone has an imagination, whether they use it a lot or not. I believe the song Fireflies by Owl City is all about the general desire to have what you can't currently see. So when I was having that conversation with my dad that day, we talked about how the song shows how Adam thinks about that stuff all the time, so much so that it even keeps him up at night. Then I started talking about how much I like Adam's music in general. I mentioned that something about all of its ethereal energy just clicks with me on a deep level. And that's when I remember my dad made an observation. He said, "Adam seems to be a bit of a floater, kind of like you, Elisha." And I thought about that statement. It stuck with me. I can be a bit of a floater. That's what made me want to make this video. I think many people can relate to the idea of not getting too caught up in the fine details of the world and rather getting stuck in your own imagination a lot. I think that's what my dad meant by a quote-unquote floater. It's the type of person that longs for the things they think about in their imagination. Obviously, those things don't exist in our world, but those kinds of people just might believe those things have some sort of power or relevance anyways. All of this is to say, I believe this kind of person has a lot more power in the world than they might seem. And I know I'm not the first person to have ever said that. However, I do think I may be able to help people channel their inner floater well. But before I get into that, let me ask you a different question. The question that all of this would beg. What do people do with this? If they're obsessed with the things that, by nature, cannot physically exist, how exactly do they express themselves in a form that people can see? Well, that is exactly why I'm so very grateful that God gave us the medium of art. Art continues to prove it has power and relevance day by day, and whether you have a big imagination or not, art resonates with all kinds of people. There's painting, drawing, pottery, and the other classics you may instantly think of. But it can even extend to making your own podcast or YouTube video, writing an essay or a book, being a motivational speaker or pastor, or even a comedian. For me, there's making your own cartoon and telling a story that hopefully resonates with people. There's a lot of different ways you can express your love of the spiritual. And as I bring that word up, spiritual, I want you to remember not to be mistaken. That is what this all pertains to. The spiritual world. The spiritual world is sort of like when you see a 2D picture of a box, and then behind that, there's obviously a third dimension, meaning there's more to the box than you initially saw. That's how, like, when we see all this physical terrain in the world around us, that's not all there is to it. There's also people's emotions and well-beings in their soul. We all have a spirit. All of those mediums within the realm of art I listed are tools to try and feed people's spirits, all in their own different ways. They all have their own way of doing it, all to their own degree of success. And while we think about all these artistic mediums, we mustn't forget the crown jewel of them all. Within this colorful world of craftsmanship, it seems like what might be the most popular way these spiritual longings can be expressed is music. Music has a completely psychedelic and even hypnotic effect on people. All people are drawn to music and have some sort of level of appreciation for it. It's no wonder so many different artists hopped onto the train of creating this comfort for the human soul, Taylor Swift, Michael Jackson, other popular artists, bro. I don't know. I live under a rock. Maybe Kanye. And, like I said, Owl City. Music may truly be the closest we can ever get to genuine, legitimate expression of that which is spiritual. If you were to ask people what the scientific basis for all of this is, most people would probably go to the right-brained versus left-brained idea. The tale goes that people who use their right side of their brain tend to be artistic and skilled at language, while left-brainers learn all the details, facts, and data. I believe that kind of person that you might call a floater could be a right-brained person. Now, it turns out those physical sides of the brain don't actually correlate to those different strengths, but I think it's at least a fun way to think about it. However, remember that this quote-unquote guide for people is far from black and white. It's never ever going to be the case that anyone is only left-brained or only right-brained, but rather, we're all on a spectrum. Many people can be both left-brained and right-brained. That said, it is also very much so a personality type. I know many people who are very skilled at language and artistic expression. They're the kinds of people that don't care too much about science or math. Like I said, I kind of am that sort of person. Talking about science and math just puts me to sleep, but talking about a cartoon world where characters can control their own mystical powers in a pixel art style, oh, I'm all over that. It's expression, it's art, and it's very, very human. And I think that will be the turning point with all of this. This is where I ask, why are we this way? And how can this strength serve a purpose in our society? Why do we dream about things we can't have? It seems every kind of person can serve a purpose, and in order to maximize the usefulness for every person, in order to make the world a better place, we need to play into everyone's strengths, not just the tough people and the smart ones and the scientists that make society run. No, it's everyone. Imagination definitely does help our world. An example of that would be graphic design. I mean, look all around you. Odds are there are probably about 5 different unique graphics in the room you're sitting in. Logos, book covers, t-shirt designs, those were all made by someone with some level of artistic license, and they're useful for those companies so its workers can keep getting money and feeding their families. Even a road sign that you may see while driving has some sort of artistic and psychological design to it. They definitely try to make those signs the right color and font type and size, the way they would need to be in order for people to not crash and die. But those are very practical examples of artists' contributions to the world. What are ones that are a little more out there? Well, the place my mind immediately goes to is animated movies. What were you expecting? Watching movies and TV shows are a common practice done to unwind or relax after your day of working. Seeing a good story often gives people a new perspective on how other people work, and it inspires us to want to be better people. Therefore, movies and shows can definitely feed people's spirits in a positive way, and that is very helpful for society. For example, I think Inside Out 1 and 2 are both really good examples of helpful movies to kids and adults alike. Everyone obviously knows what different emotions feel like, but I think showing that to them in the style of a fun, easy-to-grasp cartoon is very helpful for understanding our feelings. I remember watching that second movie and seeing anxiety take over Riley's feelings, which was showing how detrimental anxiety can be to our minds and even our self-images. Honestly, I think overall, it's just really cool that people can now pinpoint these emotions we feel to specific images of these cartoon characters. After all, it is so good to be able to name your emotions. So, there's an example of a movie that helps people. Many kids that see it are probably going to be able to manage their emotions and live their lives a bit better. And if they're so blessed, they'll even be able to care for their spouses and potential children better. Then they'll live out their lives and eventually die, and so will their partners and kids. Thus, the cycle repeats. So, having created that animated movie did help people. However, this here is the downside. It wasn't in an everlasting way. It was good for a time, but it didn't really save any lives. And that's because I'm convinced that's how it's going to be if you don't do it for the glory of God. Here's the statement I want to make. With this video in of itself being an expression of my spirit, I personally believe that the best works of art are the ones that make statements. So here's what I got. I am so grateful that I was able to channel my inner artistic expression side into faith in Jesus Christ. Honestly, back when I was a floater and I was only interested in artistic expression for the sake of just feeling good, That started turning into sort of a destructive lifestyle. I loved playing video games and watching movies and YouTube, but that was all I did. The way I would have justified it would have been this: I'm just passionate. I'm doing it because I genuinely enjoy it. And it's not like that mindset is anti-biblical, but in my case, it was kind of my way of hiding my selfishness. I didn't pay attention in school. I didn't even try to do anything productive. And I didn't really talk to my family either. That stuff just wouldn't hold my attention. So often I snapped at my family and I didn't pay attention in school and I stayed home, unemployed, unfulfilled, and unhappy. It also wasn't just cartoons and video games that I was unhealthily obsessed with. Honestly, I also really wanted a girlfriend. I had crushes on lots of girls, and that sort of led me to very unhealthy hyperfixation on something that I wasn't even ready for. All of that stuff was basically me just chasing good feelings that didn't last very long. I felt the ginormous empty void in my life, and eventually, for the first time in my life, all of that stopped making me happy. They ended. And that was when I finally looked up and realized I want something eternal. What I realized was that I could use my creativity to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to people in my cartoons, artwork, and YouTube videos. After I decided to surrender my own ways and instead let God work through me, I got an unexplainable sense of stability in my soul. I felt like everything was going to be okay. I started spending more time with my family. I got a job, and I actually started seeing the world around me that did exist in all of its beauty. I honestly got more intellectually smart and attentive. I gained a desire to help the world more, so I started doing volunteer work. I ministered at church and Christian events for teens. It was an infinitely better life. None of this is to brag on myself, only to brag on God. And I've learned specifically, spreading the gospel is really, really useful to people. That's actually something that saves lives. Receiving Jesus is way more useful than just learning a piece of advice or being told you've got nothing to prove or whatever. No, we're talking about having a relationship with a God who will meet you exactly where you're at. He will comfort you and provide for you everything you need, and above all else, He'll love on you. Without Jesus, I'd still just be a floater chasing the next high. But now, I'm a floater who's obsessed with the love of God and spreading it. So, back to my example from earlier. It is good and helpful to make a cartoon interpretation of one's emotions. It helps people. Just remember, Jesus says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. That's 1 Corinthians 10:31. So go ahead and help people in that way. But if you want some eternal rewards, make sure it's for God. Maybe post a Bible verse on your social media or tell a coworker Jesus loves them. However the Holy Spirit leads you. If you show you're following Jesus, then people will attribute your hard work to the name of Yahweh and He'll be glorified. Like I said earlier, I relate to Owl City because I like to think about that which I cannot see. But I'm eternally grateful that God picked me up and made sure I didn't get too far into doing my own thing. And as it turns out, it looks like Owl City found the same thing I did. He's made a number of songs glorifying Jesus, and it looks like he's doing his whole music career for the glory of God, and I think that's awesome. I want to express my spirit with this same motivation he does. I'd create my cartoons, I'd preach my sermons, and I'd talk to people about faith. And if it's ever for the glory of man, then I don't want to do it. I am not interested. We all have that inner floater in us. And I think what that really boils down to is just desiring something truly beautiful apart from this world. Something pure. I think God is exactly what that is. Psalm 34:8. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. If it weren't for Jesus, I'd be dead in the water, no chance of survival. If he weren't good, then I'd be condemned to a life of despair. But I'm not, because he is good. He's every good thing I can imagine and more.